Hello friends, welcome to the fantastic world of stories and why we tell them from Culture Katha. After a really long time, I returned to the great Indian epic, the Mahabharata. But this time, not to Vyasa's epic, but to the Jain version of the epic. Yes, the Mahabharata as told in Jain literature. Here, I would like to remind you that I had done a video on the Jain version of the Ramayana too a few years back. If you would like to watch it, please check the link to the video given in the description box below. But now back to the Jain Mahabharata. The Mahabharata, like the Ramayana, was transmitted orally over centuries before it came to be written down. The oral versions of the epic were so popular among people that the Jains went on to compose their own versions of the story of the Pandavas. But what do I mean by their own versions? Well, for one, there is more than one Jaina version of the epic, generally referred to as the Harivamsha Purana. But the first, most complete work was composed by Jinasena in the 8th century of the Common Era. Subsequently, several Jain versions of the epic were composed in Prakrit and Kannada based on Jinasena's work. All these versions typically have 4 components. 1. The adventures of Krishna's father Vasudeva, called Vasudeva Hindi. 2. The life story of Krishna from his birth to his death. 3. The biography of Neminatha, also known as Arishtanemi, who was the 22nd Tirthankar of the Jains, who, incidentally, according to Jain tradition, was the first cousin of Krishna. And 4. The story of the Pandavas and their conflict with their cousins, the Kauravas. As you can see, most part of the Jaina version relates to Krishna's life and his clan, and very little to the Pandava story. Indeed, unlike the Vyasa Mahabharata we know, the Jaina versions choose to subsume the Pandava story under the larger story of Krishna and his clan. No wonder these versions are aptly referred to as the Harivamsha Puranas. So, are these Jaina versions the same as Vyasa's, or are they different? The Jaina versions too tell us of the escalating conflict between the Pandavas and the Kauravas after the death of Pandu. The Kauravas try to kill them in the lacquer house from which the Pandavas escape. After they return to Hastinapura, they are given half the kingdom, which they lose once again to the Kauravas in a game of dice. At this point, the Jaina versions start to deviate from the versions we are familiar with. In the Jaina versions, the Pandavas, having lost the game of dice to the Kauravas, seek asylum with Krishna, who had moved his kingdom to Dwaraka, or Dwaravati as it was called then. Besides this, there are several small and big differences between the Jaina and Vyasa's versions of the epic. In the Vyasa Mahabharata, Draupadi becomes the wife of all the Pandavas. But the Jains probably found the idea of polyandry unacceptable. So in their version, Draupadi is only the wife of Arjuna. Mahabharata scholar Iravati Karve says that the Jain Puranas were unkind to Draupadi and painted her as an unfaithful, oversexed woman who was the reason for the ill fate that befell the Pandavas. Vyasa Mahabharata, on the other hand, paints her as a real person who fumes and frets over her misfortunes but remains faithful to her 5 husbands right till the end. Karve also says that the notion that Draupadi loved Karna comes from the Jain Puranas, whereas in Vyasa's version, Karna and Draupadi hardly meet, let alone fall in love. The Jain Harivamsha Puranas give a lot of importance to Krishna. In our common understanding, Krishna was called Vasudeva because he was the son of Vasudeva. But in the Jaina tradition, Vasudeva was a title given to a man of great valor and splendor. A Vasudeva never lacked anything, found good in everything, and never fought a battle standing on the ground. In the Jaina tradition, Krishna rises up to the position of Vasudeva through his own efforts and strategy. In the Jain mythological universe, Krishna is an important person, a Shalaka Purusha. While he is acknowledged as a great hero, he is depicted as a person who enjoys immense power and the pleasures that come with it. However, as he leads a life of karma and bondage, Krishna is not raised to the position of a Tirthankara. In the Jain Puranas, Jarasandha, who happened to be Kamsa's father-in-law, was Krishna's arch enemy. In fact, in the Jain version, the Kurukshetra battle is depicted as a war between Krishna and Jarasandha, in which the Pandavas side with Krishna and the Kauravas side with Jarasandha. In the Kurukshetra battle, Krishna kills Jarasandha and after conquering all the four directions becomes Ardha Chakravartin, or the ruler of half of Bharata. There's yet another curious story that is narrated about Krishna and the Pandavas in the Jain version of the epic. After the Kurukshetra war, in which Krishna kills Jarasandha, Draupadi is suddenly abducted by a king named Padmanabha from a different continent. Krishna helps the Pandavas rescue her and bring her back. But on the way back to Dwaraka, Bhima plays a childish prank on Krishna by hiding his boat that Krishna needed to cross the river Ganga. As a result, Krishna ends up carrying his chariot, his charioteer, and the horses on himself across the river. But when Krishna comes to know that the Pandavas were behind the prank, he is enraged and banishes them from Dwaraka. The Pandavas, forced out of Dwaraka, then move south and settle down in the city of Mathura, the city we know today as Madurai in the state of Tamil Nadu. This is very interesting because in some Tamil folk ballads, Arjuna marries Allirani, the warrior queen of Madurai. Karna and Arjuna incidentally feature prominently in these folk ballads. In the Jain version of the epic, the Pandavas eventually return to Dwaraka only when they hear about the destruction of the Yadava clan and the death of Krishna. And so we find in the Jain version, the Pandavas are not depicted as glamorous or valorous as we know them, but as minor allies of Krishna. So while in the Vyasa Mahabharata, the Harivamsha is an annexure to the story of the Pandava-Kaurava conflict, in the Jain Purana, this structure is reversed. The conflict of the Kuru cousins is embedded into the larger story of Krishna's clan. Krishna's death and the destruction of the Yadava clan is narrated in the Maushala Parvan, the 16th book of Vyasa Mahabharata. This story is narrated in the Jain version too, but with some differences. In the Jain Harivamsha Purana, Krishna is killed by his stepbrother Jarat Kumara, who incidentally was an illegitimate son of Krishna's father Vasudeva. So it turns out in the end, Krishna was killed by his own brother. But what makes the Jain version most intriguing is the story of Vyasa himself. Here, the Yadavas do not kill each other with pestles, musala, as told in Vyasa's epic. Instead, the city of Dwaravati or Dwaraka is cursed to be burnt down by an ascetic named Dvipayana, who was none other than Vyasa himself, as we know him, Krishna Dvaipayana. Sage Dvipayana curses the Yadavas before he is himself killed by them. So unlike in the Hindu tradition where Vyasa is an immortal, in the Jaina tradition he is not. Over time, although Vyasa's epic has clearly prevailed over other versions in public imagination, the importance of the Jaina version cannot be underestimated. This is because Mahabharata scholars and historians believe that the Jaina and the Bauddha versions of the epic developed in parallel to the Brahminical version we know today as Vyasa Mahabharata. All the three traditions, that is the Jaina, Bauddha and the Brahminical traditions, developed independently, at least in the initial years, and each of them has chosen to use the popular story to preach the core philosophies of their religions. Indeed, unlike the Vyasa Mahabharata that advocates righteous action referred to as Pravritti Marga, the path of action, the Jain Mahabharata endorses the Jaina philosophy of monasticism, that is Nivritti Marga, a path that rejects the world we live in. So in the Jaina version of the epic, all the Pandavas eventually embrace monkhood, setting out in pursuit of Kaivalya Jnana, or ultimate liberation from this painful world. So friends, that was the Jain Mahabharata for you. In short, hope you enjoyed listening to it. Till we meet again over yet another interesting story. Tada, bye bye, take care.